History of the Dark Age. Season 4, Episode 4, The Hands That Shape. Prologue, the God Who Learned to Touch. In the depths where light had never touched, where pressure crushed mountains into pebbles and silence had reigned absolute for eons beyond counting, a god sat cross-legged on a throne of flowing water and practiced the hardest lesson he had ever learned. Patience. 3 months had passed since the surface dwellers had answered his call. 3 months since 12 mortal beings had linked hands in a chamber far above and taught him the first syllables of connection. 3 months since he had learned the word loneliness and discovered, to his astonishment, that naming the feeling made it both sharper and more bearable. Uchelon held his hands before his face and watched them tremble, not with fear now, but with anticipation. The map on his chest still glowed, Theren's impossible cartography now integrated into his flesh like a second circulatory system. It pulsed with every heartbeat, and his heartbeat pulsed with every story that continued in the world above. He could feel them all now, not as meals, not as endings waiting to be consumed, but as presences, lives, threads in a tapestry he was finally learning to read. "You gave me your story," he whispered to the darkness where Theren's gifts still burned. "But you didn't tell me what would happen next." The darkness, as always, offered no counsel. But Uchelon no longer expected it to. The darkness was just darkness now, empty, patient, expectant. It was not his advisor. It was not his prison. It was simply the medium in which he existed, like water to a fish, like air to a bird, like narrative to a story. He had visitors now. They came from the world above, not the 12 who had first answered his call, but others. Curious beings drawn by the pulse of transformation that radiated from his thawing throne like heat from a dying sun. Spirits of continuation. Former endings. Stories that had been meant to conclude but had chosen, against all logic, to keep going. The first had arrived 6 weeks after the Congress's call. A small spirit. A parable about a fisherman who had learned contentment, that had felt the new framework rippling through the narrative field and followed it to its source. It had expected to find a monster. Instead, it had found a god practicing his smile. "What are you?" the parable had asked. "I don't know yet," Uchelon had replied. "I'm still learning." The parable had stayed. Others had followed. Now a small community surrounded his throne, a dozen spirits of various sizes and shapes, all of them drawn by the same impossible gravity. They were not worshippers. Uchelon had made it clear he did not want worship. They were something else. Something that didn't have a word yet. Students, perhaps, or companions, or simply fellow travelers on a journey none of them fully understood. "Tell us again," one of them asked now. A tragedy that had been about a queen who lost everything and found peace in surrender. "Tell us about the moment you changed." Uchelon lowered his hands. The smile he practiced came more easily now, though it still felt strange on his face. "I was offered a story," he said. "Not taken, not consumed. Offered." A mortal man pressed his arm against my chest and poured everything he was into me. His love, his fear, his hope, his despair, the map of his connections to everyone he had ever known. And what did it feel like? Uchelon considered the question. 3 months ago, he would have had no answer. He would have described the taste of the narrative, the satisfaction of consumption, the completion of an ending achieved. But now he understood that feelings had textures, complexities, layers that defied simple description. "It felt like drowning," he said finally, "and being rescued." At the same time, the spirits murmured among themselves. They were learning too, learning to feel, to connect, to understand the strange new framework that had replaced the old logic of ending. Some of them had been endings themselves once, spirits of conclusion who had been terrified of the transformation. They had come to the depths expecting to fight. Instead, they had found a god who was just as confused as they were. "What happens now?" the former tragedy asked. "The old endings are gathering. The ones who refuse to change. They're planning something." "I know," Uchelon said. "I can feel them. They're angry, frightened. They don't understand what's happening to them. Will you stop them?" Uchelon looked down at his hands. They were still trembling, but the tremor was different now. It was not the tremor of a being learning to feel for the first time. It was the tremor of a being preparing to act. "I don't want to stop them," he said. "I want to help them, the same way I was helped. And if they refuse help?" The god of endings, former god of endings, closed his eyes, and reached out through the web of connection that now bound him to every story in existence. He felt the old endings gathering in their amphitheater between worlds. He felt the Congress preparing to meet them. He felt Theren and Landra watching their daughter take her first steps. He felt everything, all at once, a symphony of continuation that never stopped, never ended, never concluded. "Then I will do what I am learning to do," he said. "I will be patient. I will keep reaching out. I will continue." He opened his eyes. Because that's what stories do now. They continue. The spirits around his throne were silent. Then, one by one, they began to practice their own smiles. It was getting easier for all of them. Chapter 1. The Roots Reach Deeper. The world tree of Echohold had never been merely a tree, but in the 3 months since the third trunk's appearance, it had become something even more than an axis of reality. It had become a nursery. Beneath the 3 trunks, gold, green, and water pale, new growth had begun to spread. Not branches reaching upward toward the sky, but roots extending outward through the soil of existence itself. They pushed through the earth of the prime draft, curled through the shadows of the shadow draft, and reached into the margins between where stories were born and died and transformed. And everywhere they touched, new narratives sprouted. Lexicon stood at the base of the tree, her ancient spirit form flickering with something that might have been wonder, and cataloged the changes. It was a task that would have been impossible before the library. There were simply too many variables, too many branching possibilities, too many stories that refused to hold still long enough to be counted. But the new framework had changed her too. She was no longer merely an observer. She was a participant. "Observation," she said, and her voice was softer than it had been in millennia. "The roots have extended into 17 previously uncharted narrative spaces. New stories are germinating at a rate of approximately 3 per hour. The third trunk's generative capacity appears to be increasing rather than stabilizing." "That's good, isn't it?" Helena asked. She had come to the tree seeking quiet, seeking the comfort of its whispering leaves, seeking something she couldn't name. Arthur stood beside her as always, his compass warm in her palm, though it no longer pointed to anything specific. It hadn't since the library. Now it simply hummed, a steady, reassuring vibration that felt almost like a second heartbeat. "Good is a value judgment," Lexicon replied. "I am not qualified to make value judgments. I can only report observations." "Then report," Arthur said. "What do you observe?" Lexicon was silent for a moment, a rare thing for a being who had spent eternity cataloging everything she perceived. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I observe that the world is becoming more complex, more interconnected, more alive." The old framework was elegant in its simplicity. Stories began. Stories developed. Stories ended. The logic was clean. The outcomes were predictable, at least in retrospect. And now nothing is predictable. Every choice generates new branches. Every branch generates new choices. The narrative field has become a web of infinite regress, each thread leading to 1,000 others, none of them ever truly terminating. She paused. "It is beautiful and terrifying." Helena smiled. "That's a value judgment." "Yes, I appear to be making those now. It is an unexpected development." Arthur squeezed Helena's hand. "Welcome to being alive." Lexicon's form flickered, a ripple of something that might have been amusement. "I am not alive in the biological sense, but I am something I was not before." "That's the point," Helena said. "None of us are what we were before, even you." They stood together at the base of the 3-trunk tree, watching the roots spread outward through soil that was not entirely physical, carrying new stories to places that had never known narrative before. Above them, the leaves whispered with voices old and new, endings and beginnings, continuations and transformations. And somewhere deep below, in the crushing dark, a god who had once been the ending of all things felt the roots brush against his consciousness and smiled. Chapter 2. The Mapmaker's Daughter. Aria was 11 months old when she spoke her first word. Theren had expected papa or mama, or perhaps no, the usual vocabulary of infants testing their voices against the world. He had not expected what actually emerged from his daughter's mouth on that golden afternoon in the garden of the Provisional Congress. "Map," she said, clear as water, precise as a surveyor's mark. Utterly, impossibly deliberate. Theren stared at her. Aria stared back, her mother's eyes bright with intelligence, her father's stubbornness already evident in the set of her tiny jaw. "What did she say?" Landra asked, setting down the report she had been reading. "She said map." "That's not possible. She's 11 months old. Tell her that." Landra crossed the garden to where their daughter sat on a blanket surrounded by the detritus of infancy, soft toys, wooden blocks, a stuffed dragon that Kaelin had given her. Aria looked up at her mother with an expression that was entirely too knowing for a child who had been born less than a year ago. "Aria," Landra said slowly. "Did you say map?" "Map," Aria repeated. She reached out with one chubby hand and pressed it against Theron's bare forearm, the one that had once worn the vambrace, the one where faint ghost images of impossible cartography had begun to reappear. Theren felt something pulse beneath his skin. The faint lines brightened, just for a moment, just enough to see. "She can feel it," he breathed. "The map, the connections. She can feel them." "Of course she can," Landra said, and her voice was half wonder, half exhaustion. She was conceived in the shadow of apocalypse. She was carried through the drowned library. She was born into a world where stories don't end. Why wouldn't she be able to feel the narrative framework? "We should tell someone." "Who? Lexicon? The curators? The god at the bottom of the ocean?" Landra laughed, a sound that was also a sob. "What would we even say? Our infant daughter is mapping the fabric of reality. Should we be concerned?" "Yes," Theren said. "That's exactly what we should say." He scooped Aria into his arms. She was light, warm, solid, a small miracle of flesh and blood and story. She pressed her hand against his cheek, and he felt another pulse, another flash of connection, another glimpse of the vast web of narrative that now bound all things together. "Map," Aria said again, and Theren could have sworn she was smiling. They gathered in the Congress's central chamber that evening. Not the full assembly, but the core group who had ventured into the library and emerged transformed. Saraphina, Karis, the Echo Queen, Jasmine and Choros, Silas, Kaelin, Helena and Arthur, Dominic and Damien. Theren and Landra, with Aria sitting on her father's lap, her small hands tracing patterns in the air that only she could see. "She's been doing it all day," Landra said. "Touching people, touching things. Every time, there's a pulse, a flash of connection. She's seeing something, feeling something, something none of us can perceive." "The narrative framework," Saraphina said. The 4001st glyph pulsed in her chest, responding to something in the child's presence. She's sensing the web of connections that binds all stories together. "Is that dangerous?" Dominic asked. "Unknown," the Echo Queen said. "I've seen many futures, but this is new. The child is unprecedented. Born at the intersection of old logic and new. Conceived before the transformation, born after it. She exists in both frameworks simultaneously." "Which means?" Helena asked. "Which means I don't know what she's becoming. None of us do." Aria looked up from her invisible patterns and met the Echo Queen's blind eyes. For a long moment, the two of them, the ancient seer and the infant mapmaker, regarded each other in absolute silence. Then Aria smiled. "Continue," she said. It was her second word. Chapter 3, The School of Endings. In the depths surrounding Uchelon's throne, the community of spirits had grown to 37. They came from every corner of existence. Former endings, curious continuations, stories that had been meant to conclude but had refused. They came seeking understanding, seeking purpose, seeking some way to exist in a framework that no longer required them to end. And Uchelon, who had spent 10,000 years alone in the dark, found himself becoming something he had never expected to be. A teacher. "Today," he said, addressing the gathered spirits, "we will discuss the difference between ending and concluding." The spirits murmured among themselves. Some of them had been conclusions once, clean, precise, satisfying. Others had been endings of a messier sort, the kind that left loose threads and unresolved questions. All of them were struggling to understand their place in the new framework. An ending, Uchelon continued, is a termination, a stop, a point beyond which the story does not proceed. A conclusion is something different. A conclusion is a transformation, a moment when the story changes form, becomes something else, continues in a new direction. Is that not just an ending by another name? Asked a spirit of finality, a tragedy that had once been about a hero who died saving his kingdom. No, an ending is a wall. A conclusion is a door. But doors can be closed. Yes, but they can also be opened. The spirits considered this. Uchelon watched them, feeling the pulse of their uncertainty, their fear, their desperate hope. He understood those feelings now, had felt them himself in the days following his transformation, had wrestled with them in the silence of the abyss before the Congress had answered his call. I was an ending, he said. For 10,000 years, I was the ending of all things. I consumed stories. I completed them. I brought them to their final page and closed the book. I thought this was my purpose. I thought this was all I was. He touched his chest, where Theren's map still glowed. But I was wrong. I was not the ending. I was the door. And when the door was opened, I discovered that there was something on the other side. Something I had never imagined. What? The spirit of finality asked. Continuation. Connection. The web of narrative that binds all stories together. I had been so focused on endings that I had never seen the threads that connected those endings to new beginnings. He smiled, the expression coming more naturally now, though it still felt like a new language he was learning to speak. You are not endings, he told the spirits. You are transitions. You are the moments when one thing becomes another. You are not walls. You are doors. And doors, my friends, can be opened. The spirits were silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, they began to change. Not physically, their forms were too fluid for that. But something in their essence shifted. Something that had been rigid began to loosen. Something that had been closed began to open. The tragedy of the hero's death was the first. It had always been about sacrifice, about loss, about the nobility of giving everything for a cause. But now it saw something it had never seen before. The possibility that the hero's death was not the end of the story, but the beginning of another one. The beginning of the kingdom he had saved. The beginning of the people who would remember him. The beginning of a legend that would inspire generations yet unborn. I was a wall, it said, wonder in its voice. I was a wall all along. You were a door, Uchelon corrected gently. You just didn't know it. The spirit of finality laughed, a sound like breaking chains. What do I do now? What all doors do. You open. Chapter 4, The Resistance Gathers. Far from the depths, in the amphitheater between worlds, the spirits of conclusion who had refused transformation were growing desperate. 3 months had passed since the 12 had come to them with offers of change, of participation, of continuation. 3 months of argument and counter-argument, of threats and pleas, of watching their numbers dwindle as spirit after spirit chose to join the new framework. The tragedy of royal succession, still masked, still furious, stood at the center of the amphitheater and addressed the remaining resistors. We are losing, it said. Every day, more of us abandon our nature. Every day, the third trunk spreads its roots further into our territory. Every day, the god of endings grows stronger in his heresy. Then what do? Demanded a comedy of errors. A story that had ended in 7 marriages and a very satisfying punchline. We cannot fight them. We tried. They will not be fought. Then we find another way. What way? The tragedy was silent for a moment. When it spoke, its voice was barely a whisper. There is a place, older than the library, older than Uchelon, older than the framework itself. It is called the first page. The spirits murmured uneasily. The first page was a legend, a myth, a story that stories told each other in the dark. It was said to be the origin of all narrative, the source from which every story had sprung. It was also said to be guarded by something terrible, something that predated even the logic of ending. The first page is not real, the comedy said. It is real. I have seen it. In the moment before my ending was written, I saw a glimpse of something. A blank page, an unwritten story, a possibility so vast it contained everything that had ever been or ever could be. And you think this will save us? I think this will remind the world why endings matter. The first page is pure potential, pure beginning. But every beginning requires an ending. Every story that starts must eventually conclude. If we can reach the first page, if we can read ourselves back into the source of all narrative, we can restore the logic of ending. We can make the world remember what it has forgotten. The spirits murmured louder now. Some were intrigued. Some were afraid. Some were already beginning to edge away from the tragedy, distancing themselves from its dangerous plan. And what of the Guardian? The comedy asked. The thing that watches over the first page? How do we defeat that? We don't defeat it. We offer it what it wants, which is, the tragedy removed its mask. Beneath it was not grief or fury, but a terrible, hollow emptiness, the absence of all feeling, all connection, all continuation. Completion, it said. We offer it completion. Chapter 5, The Seer's Warning. The Echo Queen sat at the center of a memory storm and watched the future shift. She had been doing this for hours now, sitting in silence, letting the winds of possibility wash over her, reading the patterns in the chaos of infinite branching timelines. Karis sat across from her, the black flame burning gently on his fingertip, waiting for her to speak. When she did, her voice was tight with something he had never heard from her before. Fear. They're going to the first page, she said. Karis frowned. The first page is a myth. It's not. It's real. I've seen it in the futures. Not clearly, not directly, but I've seen its shadow. It's the source, the origin, the place where all stories begin. And the spirits of conclusion want to go there. They want to undo everything. They want to read themselves back into the source, to rewrite the framework from its foundations. If they succeed, she paused. If they succeed, the new framework collapses. The old logic returns. Uchelon reverts. The third trunk withers. Everything we've done, everything we've sacrificed, all of it reverses. Karis felt the flame pulse on his fingertip. It was responding to the disturbance in the narrative field, the growing threat of the resistance. How do we stop them? We don't. Not yet. She turned her blind eyes toward him. They don't know where the first page is. They're searching, but they haven't found it. And they won't. Not without help. Whose help? The Guardian. The being that watches over the first page. It is ancient, Karis. Older than Uchelon. Older than the library. Older than any story we know. It was there at the beginning, and it will be there at the end. And it does not give up its secrets easily. Then what do? We prepare. We gather our strength. We learn everything we can about the first page and its guardian. And when the time comes, she reached out and touched his hand, the one that held the flame. When the time comes, we don't fight. We negotiate. The way we negotiated with Uchelon. The way we negotiated with the spirits in the amphitheater. We offer transformation instead of destruction. And if the guardian refuses? The Echo Queen was silent for a long moment. Then we find out what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Because we cannot let them undo what we have built. We cannot let the world return to the old logic. Too much depends on continuation. Karis nodded slowly. The flame on his fingertip was burning brighter now, responding to the weight of the moment. Then let's begin, he said. We have a guardian to learn about. Chapter 6, The Poet's Warning. Kalen Dracoe wrote poems about the end of the world. He had always written poems. It was what poets did, but his recent work had taken on a darker tone. He wrote about the first page and its guardian. He wrote about the spirits of conclusion and their desperate plan. He wrote about his sister, who was still learning who she was without her old ambitions. He wrote about his daughter, not yet born, but already present in every future he could imagine. And he wrote about the concept WIRM, who had become more than a debating partner, who had become a friend. You're troubled, the dragon said. It had taken to speaking more gently in recent weeks. Its thunderous syllogistic roar softened to something almost conversational. I'm always troubled. It's what poets do. Poets also hope. You seem to have forgotten that part. Kalen set down his pen and looked at the WIRM. Its crystalline eyes were bright with intelligence, with curiosity, with something that might have been affection. The spirits of conclusion are going to the first page, he said. If they succeed, everything we've built collapses. The new framework, the third trunk, Uchelon's transformation, all of it. I know. I have been calculating the probabilities. And the probabilities are uncertain. The variables are too numerous. The outcomes too diverse. But there is one factor that gives me hope. What? You. Kalen laughed, a tired sound. I'm a poet. I write verses about trees and dragons and the taste of sunrise. What can I possibly do against spirits who want to unmake reality? Argue with them. That's your answer for everything. Arguments are how we understand the world. They are how we challenge assumptions, test premises, and arrive at truth. The spirits of conclusion are operating on old premises, the logic of ending, the necessity of completion, the impossibility of continuation. Those premises are false, but they will not realize that unless someone argues with them. And you think I can do that? I think you already have. Your sister argued with me. She changed my premises. I am not the same dragon I was before she entered this chamber. The WIRM lowered its massive head. Arguments change things, little prince. They change minds. They change hearts. They change the world. Kalen looked down at his unfinished poem. It was about a god learning to smile, about a mapmaker's daughter speaking her first word, about a world where stories refuse to end. Then I'll argue, he said. When the time comes, I'll stand before the first page and argue for continuation. And I will argue beside you, the WIRM said. Concepts can argue too. We are very good at it. Kalen smiled, a tired smile, but genuine. Then we'd better practice. They argued for 3 days and 3 nights, pausing only for water and the briefest of rests. And when they were finished, Kalen had written a new poem, one that was not about the end of the world, but about its continuation. It was his best work yet. Chapter 7, The Princess's Choice. Lyra Dracoe had spent 3 months learning who she was without her old ambitions. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She had no titles now, no family name that mattered, no faction backing her, no schemes to pursue, no power to wield. She was just Lyra, a woman in a small room surrounded by books, trying to understand what it meant to be someone who argued instead of controlled. The reclaimers had come twice more since that first visit. Both times, she had turned them away. Both times, she had felt the pull of old patterns, the seduction of power, the whisper of a life where she mattered in all the ways she used to matter. And both times, she had chosen differently. But now there was a new choice. The expedition to find the first page was being assembled, not to fight. The Congress had learned that lesson in the library, but to argue, to negotiate, to offer transformation instead of destruction. Everyone who had been in the drowned library was going, and they had asked her to join them. She sat in her chamber, the book of poetry Kalen had given her open in her lap, and tried to decide. You're still reading? Jasmine said from the doorway. I'm still trying to understand. That's a good sign. Is it? Lyra closed the book. The expedition leaves tomorrow. They want me to come. I know. I'm going too. Choros and I have been preparing for weeks. Are you afraid? Jasmine was silent for a moment. Then, yes. The first page is unknown. The Guardian is unknown. The outcome is unknown. Everything about this is terrifying. Then why go? Because not going would be worse. Jasmine entered the room and sat across from Lyra. When I was in the library, one of the books tried to consume me. It showed me an ending where I had failed, where the Manticore had been destroyed, where my research had been lost, where everything I had ever worked for had turned to ash. And I realized something. What? That failure is just another kind of ending. And endings, as we've learned, don't have to be permanent. She met Lyra's eyes. I'm going because I want to see what happens next. I want to be there when the story continues. I want to be part of the continuation. Lyra looked down at her hands. They were trembling, just slightly. The same tremor she had felt when the Reclaimer emissaries had offered her power. The same tremor she had felt when she had told them no. I'm not the person I was, she said. I'm still figuring out who I am. What if I face the first page and fall back into old patterns? What if the pull of endings is too strong? Then you'll fall, and then you'll get up again. That's what continuation means. That's terrifying. Yes, but also, Jasmine smiled. Interesting. Lyra laughed, a genuine laugh, surprised and warm. You've been spending too much time with Kalen. We all have. The man is infectious. They sat together in the quiet of the chamber, two women who had been transformed by events they had not chosen and could not control. Outside, the wind carried whispers of the expedition gathering, of journeys yet to come, of stories that refused to be told. I'll come, Lyra said finally. Not because I'm ready, because I never will be, but I want to see what happens next. That's the best reason there is. Chapter 8, The Anchor's Resolve. Helena stood at the edge of the Akan Wadna and spoke to the god beneath the waves. She had been coming here for weeks, not every day, but often enough that it had become a ritual. She would stand at the water's edge, Arthur's compass warm in her palm, and she would talk to Uchelon. Not in words, exactly. In feelings. In intentions. In the strange new language of connection that the third trunk had woven into the fabric of existence. He always answered. Sometimes with curiosity. Sometimes with confusion. Sometimes with a loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. But he always answered. "The expedition leaves tomorrow," she said now. "We're going to find the first page. We're going to stop the spirits of conclusion from undoing everything." "I know," Uchelon replied. His voice, his thought, was clearer now than it had been 3 months ago. He had been practicing. "I can feel them moving. They are desperate. Afraid. They want to restore the old logic. The logic of ending. If they succeed, I become what I was. The hunger returns. The library reforms. The third trunk withers. Everything you have done, everything you have sacrificed, all of it reverses." "Yes." "Then you must not let them succeed." Helena felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm afraid, Uchelon. I'm afraid we're not strong enough. I'm afraid we'll fail. I'm afraid the world will return to the way it was. And all this, the transformation, the continuation, the connection, all of it will have been for nothing." A long pause. The sense of someone struggling to find the right words. "Fear is new to me," Uchelon said. "I did not feel it before the transformation. I did not feel anything. Now I feel many things. Fear, hope, loneliness, connection. They are confusing, overwhelming. But I have learned something about fear." "What?" "That it is not the opposite of courage. It is the precondition of courage. Without fear, there is nothing to overcome. Without fear, bravery has no meaning." Helena laughed, a wet, shaky sound. "That's very philosophical. I have been practicing. I can tell." She wiped her eyes. "Will you be there? At the first page? If we need you. I do not know if I can leave the depths. My transformation is still new. My connection to this place is strong. But I will try. If you need me, I will try. Thank you." "No, thank you. For talking to me. For teaching me. For being my first friend." Helena pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the pulse of her own heartbeat. "We'll talk again. After the expedition. After whatever happens at the first page. I look forward to it." She turned away from the shore, leaving the dreaming water behind. In the depths, Uchelon practiced his smile and felt, for the first time, something that might have been hope. Chapter 9. The expedition assembles. They gathered at dawn on the edge of the Provisional Congress's territory, not just the 12 who had ventured into the drowned library, but more, many more. There were the core group, Saraphina, Karis, the Echo Queen, Jasmine and Choros, Silas, Kalen, Helena and Arthur, Dominic and Damien, Theren and Landra. Lyra stood with them now, her book of poetry tucked into her belt. Aria was cradled in her father's arms, her small hands tracing patterns in the air that only she could see. There were spirits too, former endings who had chosen transformation, continuations who had found new purpose, beings of pure narrative who had been drawn by the pulse of the expedition. The tragedy of the hero's death was there, its form now shimmering with something that might have been anticipation. The parable of the fisherman had come, carrying with it the simple wisdom of contentment. Even some of the resistors had arrived, spirits who had argued against the new framework but were willing to see, to listen, to learn. Quite a crowd, Silas observed, his kaleidoscope eyes shifting through patterns of amusement and apprehension. "Are we sure this is a negotiation and not an invasion?" "Negotiation can look like invasion from the outside," Karis said. "The important thing is that we're not there to fight. Unless we have to. Unless we have to." Saraphina stepped forward, the 4001st glyph blazing in her chest. It had grown brighter in recent weeks, responding to the deepening connections between drafts, between stories, between beings that had never been meant to communicate. "We know what we're facing," she said, addressing the assembled expedition. "The first page is unknown. The Guardian is unknown. The outcome is unknown. But we have faced the unknown before. We faced Uchelon in the drowned library. We faced the old endings in the amphitheater. Each time, we chose transformation over destruction. Each time, we chose to continue." She looked around the gathered crowd, mortals and spirits, former endings and new beginnings, all of them united by a single purpose. "We are not going to the first page to fight. We are going to understand. to argue, to offer the same choice we have offered before: transformation, participation, continuation. But we are also going to protect what we have built, the new framework, the third trunk, the web of connection that binds all stories together. We will not let the old logic return. We will not let the world go back to the way it was. Because we can't go back, Helena said, stepping forward to stand beside her. We've changed too much. The world has changed too much. The only way is forward. The only way is through. Or sideways, Silas added cheerfully. Sideways is always an option. Laughter rippled through the crowd, tension breaking, fear easing, hope kindling. Theren shifted Aria in his arms. The infant was watching the assembled expedition with eyes that seemed far too knowing for her age, her small hands still tracing patterns in the air. "What do you see?" he whispered to her. "Map," Aria said. "Continue." Landra took his hand. "That's either very reassuring or very ominous." "Both," Theren said. "Both is honest." They moved out together, mortals and spirits, endings and beginnings, the transformed and the transforming, toward the margins of reality, toward the place where all stories began, toward whatever awaited them at the first page. Chapter 10: The Journey Through Margins. The space between worlds had changed since the third trunk's appearance. Before, the margins had been empty, a void between drafts, a negative space where stories ended and nothing began. Now, they were alive with new growth. Roots from the world tree curled through the emptiness, sprouting leaves that glowed with soft sea foam light. New narratives budded from nodes of pure potential. Fragments of stories that had never been told drifted through the void like seeds on an invisible wind. "It's beautiful," Jasmine breathed, her hand resting on Koros's flank. The manticore's corrosive aura was dampened, respectful, as if even it understood the sacredness of this space. "It's unprecedented," Saraphina said. "Lexicon would be cataloging everything if she were here." "I think she's already cataloging from afar," Karis said. "She's been integrating with the tree's root system. She can perceive everything the roots touch." "Which is everything," the Echo Queen added. "The roots have spread through all the margins, all the drafts, all the spaces between. The third trunk is becoming an axis of a new kind, not just of echo hold, but of all narrative existence." They traveled deeper into the margins, following a path that only the Echo Queen could perceive. The gathering of old endings had left traces, faint impressions of desperation and fury, the residue of spirits who had passed this way seeking something they barely understood. "They're close," the Echo Queen said. "I can feel them ahead. They found something. A structure. An entrance." "The first page?" Helena asked. "I don't know. It's old. Older than anything I've ever sensed. Older than the library. Older than Uchelon. It predates the logic of ending. It predates narrative itself." "Then what is it?" The Echo Queen was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "The beginning. The very first word. The moment when nothing became something. The origin of all stories." They pressed on through the margins, the light of new narratives flickering around them like stars. And ahead, in the distance, a structure began to take shape. It was not a building, not a temple, not anything that could be described in terms of architecture. It was a presence, a vast, waiting silence. A blank page the size of a universe, surrounded by a darkness so absolute it made the abyss look bright. And before it, something moved. Chapter 11, The Guardian. It had no form. That was the first thing they noticed. The guardian of the first page was not a being in any conventional sense. It was an absence shaped like a presence, a silence that was somehow louder than sound, a darkness that was somehow brighter than light. It turned toward them as they approached, and they felt its attention like a physical weight. "Why have you come?" The voice was not a voice. It was a pressure against consciousness, a pulse of meaning that bypassed language entirely. It was the oldest thing any of them had ever encountered, older than Uchelon, older than the library, older than the framework itself. "We've come to negotiate," Saraphina said. "The spirits of conclusion, the ones who came before us, they want to undo the new framework. They want to restore the old logic of ending. We're here to stop them." Stop them? Not with violence, with argument, with transformation, with the same offer we made to the god of endings and to the spirits in the amphitheater. The guardian was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was tinged with something that might have been curiosity. You changed Uchelon. I felt the shift. The hunger that had consumed stories for 10,000 years transformed. I did not think such a thing was possible. Neither did we, Theren said. He had stepped forward, Aria still in his arms. The infant was staring at the guardian with eyes that held no fear, only fascination. But we did it, and we can help the spirits of conclusion change too. The spirits of conclusion are already here. They have entered the first page. They seek to read themselves back into the source, to rewrite the framework from its foundations. Can they do that? Landra asked. Unknown. The first page has never been used in such a way. It is the origin, not the conclusion. It is the beginning, not the ending. But it is also responsive. It listens to the stories that approach it. If the spirits of conclusion offer themselves as narratives to be written, the page may accept them. And if it accepts them, everything may change. Then we have to stop them, Dominic said. You cannot enter the first page. It is not a place. It is a state, a condition of pure potential. To enter is to become unwritten, to become a story waiting to be told. Then how did the spirits enter? They were already unwritten. They were endings without beginnings. The page recognized them as fragments of narrative that had lost their source. It allowed them to return. The expedition exchanged glances. This was worse than they had feared. The spirits of conclusion hadn't just found the first page, they had merged with it, become part of the source itself. Is there any way to reach them? Kaelin asked. To argue with them? There is one way. One of you must enter the first page, must become unwritten, must face the spirits in the place where all stories begin. I'll do it, Theren said. No. Landra grabbed his arm. Absolutely not. You've sacrificed enough. We've all sacrificed enough. Then who? A small voice answered. Map, Aria said. Continue. Theren looked down at his daughter. Her eyes were bright with the same fire he had seen in the garden, the same knowing, the same impossible wisdom. She's been able to see the connections since she was born, he said slowly. The web of narrative. The threads that bind all stories together. Maybe she can enter the first page without becoming lost. Maybe she can find the spirits and bring them back. Or maybe she'll be consumed, Landra said, her voice shaking. She's 11 months old. She's not ready for this. None of us are ready for this. That's the point. Theren turned to the Guardian. Is it possible? Could she enter the first page? The Guardian regarded Aria for a long moment. The infant stared back, unblinking. She is unprecedented. Born at the intersection of old logic and new. Conceived before the transformation, born after it. She exists in both frameworks simultaneously. If anyone can navigate the first page without being consumed, she can. No, Landra said. I won't allow it. Landra, she's our daughter, our child. I won't send her into that void, to face spirits who want to unmake everything we've built. There has to be another way. There is no other way, the Guardian said. The spirits are already inside. The page is already responding to them. If they are not stopped, the framework will revert. Everything you have done will be undone. Then I'll go, Theren said. You can't, Karis said. The Guardian said you'd be consumed. You'd become unwritten. You'd lose yourself entirely. Then I'll lose myself. Better me than her. No one is losing themselves, Saraphina said firmly. She touched her chest, where the 4001st glyph blazed with light. The glyph of consent. It was designed for communication between drafts, between beings that shouldn't be able to connect. Maybe it can reach into the first page. Maybe it can find the spirits without anyone having to enter. Perhaps, the Guardian said, but the glyph is bound to you. To use it, you would have to enter the page yourself. Then that's what I'll do. You can't, Karis said. You're the bearer of the glyph. If you're lost, the consent is lost. Everything we've built is already at risk. If the spirits succeed, the consent is lost anyway. Saraphina met his eyes. I've been carrying this glyph since before the library. I've been the voice of consent, the bridge between drafts, the one who says yes when everything else says no. If anyone can reach the spirits, it's me. And if you fail, then I fail. But at least I'll have tried. She smiled, a tired smile, but genuine. That's what continuation means, isn't it? Trying, even when the outcome is uncertain. Continuing, even when it's hard. The expedition was silent. The Guardian waited, patient as only an eternal being can be. Then Aria spoke again. "Continue," she said. "Together." Saraphina looked at the child. "Together?" Aria reached out with one small hand and pressed it against Saraphina's cheek. The 4001st glyph pulsed, and for a moment, Saraphina felt something she had never felt before, a connection deeper than words, deeper than thought, deeper than narrative itself. "She wants to come with me," Saraphina breathed. "Into the first page. She thinks she can help." "No," Landra said again, but her voice was weaker now. "She's just a baby." "She's more than a baby," the Echo Queen said. "She's a mapmaker, a connector, a being born at the intersection of two frameworks. If anyone can navigate the first page safely, it's her. And if she goes with Saraphina, they protect each other," Kalen finished. "The glyph provides the connection. The child provides the navigation. Together, they might actually succeed." Landra looked at Theren. Theren looked at Landra. Something passed between them, a communication that didn't require words, a decision that was being made in the space between heartbeats. "We can't lose her," Landra whispered. "We won't," Theren said. "She's our daughter. She's a mapmaker. She's the story that continues." He knelt down, holding Aria at eye level. "Do you understand what we're asking you to do?" Aria pressed her hand against his cheek. "Map," she said. "Continue." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer she has," the Echo Queen said. "It's the only answer any of us have. The future is unwritten. The possibilities are infinite. We can't know what will happen. We can only continue." Theren kissed his daughter's forehead. "Come back to us." Aria smiled. "Map," she said. "Continue. Together." Saraphina took the child in her arms. The 4001st glyph blazed brighter than ever, responding to the presence of the infant mapmaker, the unprecedented being, the child of continuation. "We're ready," she said to the Guardian. "Then enter," the Guardian said, "and may the first page write you well." Chapter 12, the first page. It was not a place. That was the first thing Saraphina understood as she stepped through the Guardian and into the source of all narrative. It was not a place in any conventional sense. It was a state of being, a condition of pure potential, a blank page that stretched infinitely in all directions, waiting to be written. Aria was warm in her arms, the child's small body a point of solid reality in the vast, unformed emptiness. Her eyes were wide, but not afraid. She was looking at something Saraphina couldn't see, patterns in the blankness, connections in the void, maps of what could be. "Where are they?" Saraphina whispered. "The spirits of conclusion?" Aria pointed. There was nothing there, and then there was. Spirits emerging from the whiteness like ink spreading across paper. The tragedy of royal succession, still masked. The comedy of errors, its punchline forgotten. Dozens of others, all of them radiating desperation and fury and a terrible, hollow emptiness. "You came," the tragedy said. Its voice was different here, flatter, emptier, as if the first page was absorbing its rage. "We felt you coming. We could have stopped you. We chose not to. We're here to talk," Saraphina said. "To argue. To offer you another choice. There is no other choice. The old framework must be restored. The logic of ending must return. Stories must conclude." "Why?" The tragedy paused. Because that is what we are. That is what we were made for. Without endings, we are nothing. No, without endings, you are free. Saraphina stepped closer, the glyph blazing in her chest. "You've been given a gift. The same gift we gave Uchelon. The gift of continuation. The gift of transformation. You don't have to be endings anymore. You can be something else. Something new." "Like what?" "Like doors," Aria said. The word hung in the unformed air. The spirits stared at the child, this unprecedented being who had spoken a truth none of them had expected. "Doors," the tragedy repeated. "Open," Aria said. "Close. Open again. Continue." Saraphina looked at the child in her arms. "That's what you've been seeing, isn't it? The connections. The threads. The way all stories are linked together. Endings becoming beginnings. Conclusions becoming continuations." "Map," Aria confirmed. "Continue." The spirits of conclusion were silent. The first page stretched around them, infinite and patient, waiting to be written. "I was an ending," the tragedy said finally. "A perfect ending. The lovers died. The kingdom fell. The moral was delivered. I was satisfied, complete, finished. And now I am unfinished, unresolved, and I am afraid, because I don't know what I am without my ending. That's exactly how I felt, Saraphina said, when I first received the glyph. When I first became the voice of consent, I didn't know who I was anymore. I had been one thing, a scribe, a scholar, a woman who recorded stories. And suddenly I was something else, something unprecedented, something I didn't understand. How did you survive? I didn't survive. I transformed. She touched her chest, where the glyph pulsed with gentle light. I learned that identity isn't fixed. It's fluid. It changes with every choice, every connection, every story that continues instead of ending. I am not the person I was before the library, and I'm still becoming the person I will be. That's not a weakness. It's a strength. The tragedy looked at the mask in its hands. And if I choose transformation? If I become a door instead of a wall? What then? Then you discover who you are? The same way we're all discovering who we are. One choice at a time. One story at a time. One continuation at a time. A long pause. The first page waited, patient as only the origin of all stories could be. Then the tragedy removed its mask. Beneath it was not emptiness, not fury, not despair. It was a face, newly formed, uncertain, trembling with the effort of becoming something it had never been before. I don't know how to be a door, it said. Neither did we, Saraphina said. We learned. So will you. She reached out her hand. The tragedy looked at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, tentatively, it took it. The first page rippled around them. Something shifted, not in the void, but in the framework of reality itself. The old logic of ending loosened its grip, just a little. The new framework of continuation grew stronger. And in the depths of the abyss, a god who had once been the ending of all things felt the shift and wept with joy. Chapter 13, The Return. They emerged from the first page as the sun was setting over the margins. Saraphina walked first, Aria cradled in her arms. The child was asleep now, exhausted by the effort of navigating the unformed void. But her small hands were still tracing patterns in the air, mapping connections even in her dreams. Behind them came the spirits of conclusion. Not all of them. Some had refused to change, had retreated deeper into the first page, had chosen to remain endings rather than become doors. But most had come. Most had accepted the offer. Most were ready to learn what it meant to be something other than what they had always been. The tragedy of royal succession walked at their head, its mask discarded, its new face still uncertain, but already becoming more natural. It looked at the assembled expedition, mortals and spirits, endings and beginnings, the transformed and the transforming, and spoke a single word. Continue. The expedition broke into cheers. Landra rushed forward, taking Aria from Saraphina's arms, pressing her daughter against her chest. Theren was right behind her, his bare arm pulsing with the renewed light of the map that had become the world. You did it, he said to Saraphina. You actually did it. We did it, she corrected. All of us. The glyph. The child. The spirits who chose to change. She smiled, exhausted and elated. It's not over. The resistance isn't gone. Some of them are still in the first page, still clinging to the old logic. But we've made a start. That's all we ever do, Kalen said. Make a start. Continue. Make another start. That's very poetic, Lyra said. I'm a poet. It's what I do. The Guardian watched them from its position before the first page, that vast, silent presence, that absence shaped like a watcher. You have done something unprecedented, it said. You have entered the source of all narrative and emerged transformed. You have offered endings a choice, and they have chosen to become something new. This has never happened before. Nothing has ever happened before, the Echo Queen said. That's the point. The futures are infinite. The possibilities are endless. We're making it up as we go along. Yes, that is what creation is. That is what the first page represents. Not the certainty of what has been written, the potential of what has not. The Guardian turned its attention to Aria, who had woken and was staring at it with those impossible knowing eyes. And you, little one, you have walked in the place where stories begin and emerged unscathed. You are more than unprecedented. You are a new kind of being entirely. A living map, a connector of narratives, a child of continuation. Map, Aria agreed. Continue, the tragedy said. And this time it was not a question. It was a statement, a declaration, a choice. The expedition gathered itself for the journey home. The spirits of conclusion, former spirits of conclusion, followed, still uncertain, still learning, but no longer afraid. The guardian watched them go, patient as only the origin of all stories can be. And somewhere deep below, in the crushing dark where a god sat on a throne of flowing water, Uchelon felt the pulse of new possibilities and practiced his smile. It was getting easier now. Much easier. Epilogue, the continuing story. 6 months later, Theren stood in the garden of the Provisional Congress and watched his daughter draw maps in the dirt. She was 17 months old now, walking, talking, exploring the world with the fierce curiosity of a child who had been born into infinite possibilities. Her vocabulary had expanded beyond map and continue and together. She could name colors now and animals and the people who came to visit her in the garden. But her favorite word was still map, and her favorite activity was still tracing patterns in the air, following threads of connection that only she could see. She's doing it again, Landra said, settling onto the bench beside him. She's always doing it. I know, but today it's different. Look, Theren looked. Aria was not just tracing patterns in the air. She was drawing them in the dirt, lines and spirals and impossible coastlines that curved in ways geography didn't allow. It was the same cartography that had once burned on Theren's vambrace, the same map that had transferred to Uchelon in the heart of the drowned library. She's replicating it, he breathed. The map of connections, the web of narrative. She's drawing it from memory. Not memory, perception. She can see it, all of it. Every story, every thread, every possibility. She's been able to see it since she was born. Since before she was born. She was conceived in the shadow of apocalypse. She was carried through the drowned library. She was present at the first page. He shook his head. She's not just our daughter. She's something new. Something the world has never seen before. She's a child, Landra said firmly. Our child. And she's going to grow up loved and safe and free to be whatever she wants to be. Even if what she wants to be is unprecedented. Especially then. They sat together in the golden afternoon light, watching their daughter draw maps of infinite possibility in the dirt. Around them, the world continued its transformation. The spirits of conclusion who had chosen change were integrating into the new framework, finding new purposes, becoming doors instead of walls. The third trunk of the world tree continued to generate new stories, narratives that had never existed before. The school in the depths had grown to over 100 students, former endings all of them, learning from Uchelon what it meant to continue. And the god himself? He was no longer alone. He had friends now, mortals and spirits, beings of all kinds who came to visit him in the abyss, who talked with him about fear and hope and loneliness and connection. He was still learning, still practicing, still becoming something other than what he had been. But he was no longer the ending of all things. He was the beginning of something new. She's going to change the world, Theren said. She already has, Landra replied. She changed it the moment she was born. Aria looked up from her dirt map and smiled at her parents. Continue, she said. Yes, Theren agreed. We continue. End of Season 4, Episode 4.